Yeah, everybody want to get in on the fun. Everybody wants to get in on the Caitlin Clark experience, and I don't blame them. We have someone who I think would be a great addition to Caitlin Clark and in this whole Indiana Fever team. And she's making it clear, I want to get down with the get down. Be a part of Caitlin Clark's team.
Everybody sees it now. The spotlight isn't subtle anymore. The Indiana Fever aren't just building a roster, they're sitting at the center of the league's gravity shift. And anytime gravity shifts, everything nearby starts moving. Everybody wants in on the Caitlin Clark experience. And honestly, you can't blame them. She changed the math. She changed the ratings. She changed how arenas feel when the lights come on. So now every free agent, every rotational forward, every defensive specialist is looking at Indiana like it's the place to be. But here's where we slow this down. In today's pro sports ecosystem, orbiting a generational star comes in two very different forms. The first type is the pro, the stabilizer, the enforcer who understands the assignment without needing it explained twice. They screen harder, rotate earlier, take the hits so the star doesn't have to. They don't chase the headline, they protect the engine. Their value shows up in how free the franchise player gets to operate. The second type is more
Leticia Amiwere she played with the Valkyries, from what I remember. Listen, what is she doing right here? What is she doing right here? Let's zoom in. What she playing some is that dominoes? I don't know what it is. Scrabble. I don't know what it is, but what she got on? She got on Indiana Fever merch.
complicated. Not a teammate, a tourist. Someone who sees the rating spike, the sold-out buildings, the algorithm boost, and thinks proximity equals promotion. That's not basketball hunger. That's spotlight hunger. Right now, the Fever front office has to separate those two types with surgical precision. There's been noise around Leticia Amihere, a 6'3" forward with length, mobility, and defensive upside. She's had stints with teams like the Valkyries, and recently the messaging hasn't been quiet. Fever gear, public signals, visual campaigns. That's not an agent making a call. That's an audition. From a pure basketball standpoint, the body type fits. Indiana needs length, needs rim presence, needs physicality, needs someone who can switch and survive contact. On paper, that makes sense, but paper doesn't measure intention. Indiana doesn't just need size, they need a tone setter. Someone who turns screens into collisions and loose balls into statements. A high-usage lead guard absorbs hits all season long. The bumps off ball, the grabs on cuts, the extra shoulder after the whistle. That adds up. The Fever needs someone who makes that pressure expensive. What they don't need is someone treating national TV like a rebrand tour. And that's the uncomfortable part.
I'm gonna keep, because, at this point, we got to be skeptical, y'all. We got to be a bit skeptical because we have to make sure people aren't trying to join Caitlin Clark's team for clout. We have to make sure that people are trying to be a part of the crew for the right reasons.
Wingspan, defensive rating, those are easy to evaluate in a workout. Motivation isn't. Competitive hunger and attention hunger can look similar at first, but one wants stops and wins. The other wants touches and visibility. That difference matters in a Clark-centered system, because this offense isn't built on equality. It's built on hierarchy, pace, trust, quick decisions, clean spacing. The moment someone tries to renegotiate that hierarchy mid-possession, the machine jams, lanes disappear, the transition game slows. What looked inevitable starts looking ordinary. That's not hypothetical. We've seen how personality can bend structure. Now compare that to how Sophie Cunningham approached it.
Okay, we damn sure don't need no more Natasha Howards coming over here talking about winning MVP, trying to bring the ball up the court and not giving it to Caitlin Clark. We don't need it.
She leaned into clarity, ran the floor, hit open shots, defended with urgency, stood up when contact got excessive. She capitalized on the attention without trying to redirect it. That's the blueprint. If a player comes in talking screens, rebounds, defensive tone, the door stays open. If they start hinting about usage, balance, award conversations before learning terminology, that's your warning siren. And all of this is happening under a much bigger cloud. While players are publicly auditioning for roster spots, the league itself is negotiating its labor future. The WNBA and WNBPA are intense discussions over revenue share, salary cap growth, and structural guarantees. On the other side of that table sits ownership.
Okay, Sophie Cunningham joined the crew, and listen, she's capitalized, okay? But at least Sophie Cunningham did right by Caitlin Clark, made sure she gave Caitlin Clark the ball, played the game the right way, stood up for Caitlin Clark while she was being ambushed and attacked. That's how you're supposed to come, the way Sophie Cunningham did.
And indirectly, influence from the broader NBA ecosystem. Adam Silver has emphasized urgency, but he hasn't set a hard deadline guaranteeing the season begins as scheduled. That's not emotional language, that's leverage language. A deadline only works if the person holding it is afraid of what happens when it expires. If negotiations stall, players feel disruption first. Owners can wait longer. That imbalance is real, and it changes how risk is calculated, both in the boardroom and in the locker room. Because here's the contradiction. Players want the exposure or the Clark spotlight, but if labor talks fracture, the stage itself becomes unstable. That's why Indiana has to think colder than the timeline. They can't build this roster like they're collecting names. They have to build it like they're protecting an engine. Every addition needs role.
I would love for Leticia Amenwede to join this team, okay? I think she would be a great addition. 6'3", 185 pounds, a nice forward to bring off the bench, can run, bring that athleticism. She's fiery. She play defense. She'll fight out there. That's the type of player we need. But
role acceptance, not just versatility, not just length, not just viral energy. Role acceptance, because one wrong personality doesn't just miss rotations, it shifts tempo, it bends spacing, it chips at trust, and in a system built on rhythm, that's enough to change everything. The Clark area is powerful, but it's fragile. Attention spikes don't guarantee sustainability. One boardroom miscalculation can delay momentum. One locker room misread can fracture chemistry. So the real evaluation isn't just can she defend, it's why does she want in. If the answer is screens, stops, structure, that's alignment. If the answer is spotlight, that's volatility. Indiana doesn't need theatrics. They need protection. They need discipline. They need players who understand that amplifying the engine is how you win and how you benefit long term. Because gravity is...
I'll say this. I agree with Adam Silver that it is unfortunate that we've gotten to this place. And I also agree with Adam Silver that there is a lot the league will have to accomplish. You and I have talked about it before, where it's not just the CBA. A lot of people out here are a little bit confused or have lost the plot that the NBA really does call a lot of the shots. And Adam Silver could have and should have been more prevalent and vocal of a role than he has been. So when I sit here and I listen to him talking about all of this that he's talking about at his press conference, I just keep thinking to myself, Adam, play your part, sir. Like, you can absolutely put an end to this.
It's powerful, but it only works if the orbit is stable. Instability is harder to maintain than people think, because once attention becomes currency, everybody starts calculating exchange rates. The Indiana Fever are no longer just evaluating basketball talent. They're evaluating incentive alignment. That's a different job. That's a colder job, and it requires asking questions that don't show up in stat sheets. When someone posts themselves in team gear before a contract exists, that's not random. That's positioning. When clips get accidentally circulated highlighting defensive possessions against high-profile players, that's not organic, that's narrative shaping. And in this era, narrative moves markets almost as fast as performance does. But markets are volatile. The Caitlin Clark effect created a surge. Ratings, attendance, merchandise, valuation conversations. That surge is real, it's measurable, it's undeniable. But front offices don't build contenders off surges. They build them off systems that survive when the surge plateaus. That's where discipline comes in. A star-centered offense is like a high-performance engine. It runs hot, it runs fast, it creates pressure on defenses before they're set. But engines that run hot need insulation. They need parts that absorb friction. They need pieces that don't overheat when they don't get touches for 4 straight possessions. That's the real test of anyone trying to join this roster. Can you go 3 minutes without a shot attempt and still sprint and transition defense? Can you set a screen knowing the highlight might go to someone else? Can you rotate early without clapping for recognition? Because that's what keeps the machine clean. And the Fever's biggest competitive window in decades depends on keeping it clean. This isn't a rebuild anymore. This is expectation management. Opponents aren't circling Indiana as a development night. They're circling them as a measuring stick. Every road game feels like a playoff atmosphere. Every defensive possession against Clark carries extra contact, extra chatter, extra physicality. That doesn't go away. If anything, it intensifies. So when evaluating someone like Letitia Amihere, length, athleticism, defensive versatility, the physical profile makes sense. A 6'3" forward who can switch and contest is valuable in any system. But the Fever don't need generic value. They need targeted value. They need someone who understands that their best statistical contribution might not show up in points. They need someone who enjoys making life uncomfortable for opposing guards. They need someone who embraces being the reason a possession collapses before it reaches the star. That's a mentality shift, and mentality shifts are hard to predict when the audition is happening on social media instead of in closed-door workouts. Now zoom out. While Indiana weighs all this, the league itself is in a negotiation phase that adds another layer of uncertainty. The collective bargaining talks between the WNBA and the Players Association aren't just background noise, they're structural. Revenue share, salary cap growth, housing stipends, guaranteed benefits. These aren't cosmetic adjustments. These are foundational questions about how the league distributes growth. On the other side of those talks is ownership, and indirectly influence from the NBA's broader ecosystem. Adam Silver has been measured in his language. He's emphasized urgency but avoided hard calendar ultimatums. That's not accidental. That's negotiation posture. Because leverage isn't about who feels right. It's about who can endure disruption longer. If a season start date becomes flexible, players feel the immediate hit. Owners can wait. Networks can adjust. The broader NBA machine keeps moving regardless. That imbalance shapes how aggressive each side can afford to be. And here's the uncomfortable intersection. Players are campaigning for roster spots in the most visible market in the league, while the structural framework that determines those salaries and opportunities is still being negotiated. That's volatility stacked on volatility. For Indiana, that means you can't just evaluate talent, you have to evaluate resilience. What happens if the season starts late? What happens if cap numbers shift? What happens if public momentum dips because negotiations dominate headlines instead of highlights? The wrong personality in that environment amplifies instability. The right one absorbs it. That's the difference between a contender and a headline. And headlines don't win playoff series. Let's talk hierarchy again, because this part matters. Every elite offense in modern basketball has clarity at the top, not ego clarity, structural clarity. Who initiates, who spaces, who screens, who closes. When that hierarchy is respected, possessions flow. When it's challenged, even subtly, the timing shifts. One extra dribble, one hesitation on a kickout, one look-off because someone wants to prove something. Over 40 games, that's the difference between top-tier efficiency and middle of the pack. Indiana cannot afford middle of the pack. The Clark era raised expectations too fast for patience to be the default strategy. That means the margin for chemistry mistakes is thinner than it should be for a young team. And that's why public auditions make executives uneasy, because if someone needs the world to know they want in, you have to ask whether they're comfortable doing invisible work once they're inside. Invisible work wins. Boxing out without credit wins. Rotating early without applause wins. Taking the tech so your star doesn't escalate wins. Those things don't trend, but they translate.
Look at how Sophie Cunningham handled her integration. No dramatic campaign, no public renegotiation of identity, just role acceptance and intensity. She found her advantage within the system instead of trying to stretch the system around her. That's maturity, and maturity scales in pressure environments. Now imagine the opposite scenario. A player joins with genuine defensive skill, but lingering belief that proximity to Clark should equal expanded usage. Maybe it's subtle at first, a push in transition, a post-up call that disrupts flow, a late clock ISO that wasn't the design. Individually, those moments are small. Collectively, they alter rhythm. Once rhythm goes, confidence follows. Once confidence follows, spacing tightens. And once spacing tightens, the offense slows. That's the domino effect Indiana must avoid, because opponents are already adjusting schemes specifically for this team. They're blitzing earlier, switching more aggressively, testing physical thresholds, trying to turn speed into half-court grind. The Fever need counterpunchers who understand that their job is to make that grind unsustainable for opponents, not to create parallel spotlights. Parallel spotlights fracture rooms. Single-engine systems require buy-in, and buy-in can't be faked long-term. It shows in film sessions. It shows in fourth-quarter body language. It shows when shots aren't falling and someone still sprints back to prevent a leak-out. Now add the labor backdrop again. If negotiations extend and tension rises, locker rooms across the league will feel it. Contract security questions creep in. Endorsement timing shifts. Off-season planning compresses. In unstable environments, ego either inflates or disciplines itself. Indiana needs the latter, because this isn't just about next season, it's about establishing a culture that survives attention cycles. The Clark wave brought exposure. Exposure brings scrutiny. Scrutiny amplifies flaws. The franchise can't afford self-inflicted flaws. That means the front office has to ask harder questions than fans want to ask. Is this player comfortable being second or third option every night? Is this player okay with defensive assignments being their headline? Does this player view the system as a vehicle for wins or as a vehicle for personal brand growth? Those are uncomfortable evaluations, but they're necessary, because once contracts are signed, undoing a personality mismatch costs more than cap space. It costs trust, and trust, once fractured, is slow to repair. The Fever are at a fork in the road, even if it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. They can chase every talented body that signals interest, or they can narrow the filter and prioritize cultural alignment over viral momentum. Short-term hype is seductive, long-term cohesion is quieter, but cohesion sustains playoff runs. And let's be clear, the league is watching Indiana closely. Opposing executives want to see if this surge turns into a dynasty attempt or a chaotic experiment. Media narratives are ready either way. If the Fever integrate disciplined defenders who embrace their role, the system strengthens. If they miscalculate and bring in someone who subtly bends the offense toward personal reinvention, critics will frame it as overexposure catching up to reality. That narrative swing happens fast, and in today's media cycle, perception influences negotiation leverage too. Because when labor talks heat up, optics matter. If the league appears unified and thriving, ownership has steadier footing. If headlines shift toward dysfunction, public pressure changes tone. Everything connects. On-court chemistry affects off-court leverage. Off-court leverage affects season stability. Season stability affects roster value. Roster value affects player motivation. It's a loop. That's why this moment requires colder thinking than the timeline provides. Indiana doesn't need to shut the door on ambition, they need to vet it. If Letitia Amihere, or anyone signaling interest, genuinely wants to anchor defensive possessions, absorb contact, and amplify the star without redirecting attention, that's an asset. If the motivation tilts toward using the Clark spotlight as a career accelerant first and a basketball fit second, that's risk, and risk in a compressed competitive window is expensive. Because here's the closing reality extended out. Attention waves are fragile. Labor negotiations are calculated. Locker rooms are sensitive ecosystems. One boardroom misread can delay a season. One locker room misread can derail momentum. The Clark era doesn't guarantee championships, it guarantees scrutiny, and scrutiny exposes alignment. So Indiana's evaluation process can't be emotional. It can't be reactive to social media campaigns. It has to be rooted in one core question. Does this addition protect the engine? If the answer is yes, welcome them in. If the answer is uncertain, pause, because gravity is powerful, but gravity also magnifies imbalance. And once imbalance starts, it doesn't take long for rhythm to disappear. The Fever have momentum. Now they have to prove they can protect it.